Outside of a dog, a book is a man's best friend. Inside of a dog, well, it's too dark to read.
Are you ready to make the most of the only life you have? To make smart money choices focused on achieving what you care about most? Here to help you balance living well today without sacrificing your tomorrow is the Retirement Answer Man, Roger Whitney.
Yes, out of all of the inspirational quotes ever spoken about reading in books, I had to go with Groucho Marx. I just love that quote. It's so funny. Anyway, probably one of the most often questions I'm asked as a retirement answer man is, Roger, what is a good book I can read to help me become a better investor or to plan my retirement or plan out my life better? And these are all great questions, and I have no doubt that you read a lot of books. If you listen to this show, you're probably a reader. So what I want to do in this episode is I want to share 5 books that have impacted me in some way in my journey to becoming a better advisor, a better steward of my own personal assets, but also of the assets that I guide with clients. And then I want to share 5 books that have impacted me in some way in creating a better life and planning a better life for myself, and also helping my clients plan a great life. Maybe these books will be a great resource for you. Now, here's what I think is going to happen. You're going to hear me go through my 10 books in total, and you're going to think to yourself, dude, how did you forget about this book? Or did you never read that book? You're going to have books that have impacted your life in some way in terms of being a better investor or creating a better life. Makes sense. And you know what? I have no doubt that you have read some amazing books that I got to read and that other people might need to read. So what I want you to do is jot those down. And then when you get 6 Shot Saturday, this Saturday, reply to it and share with me the books that have come to mind that had a big impact on you in one of those 2 ways. If you're not signed up for 6 Shot Saturday, go to rogerwhitney.com, enter your first name and your email, and start getting that so you can receive exclusive content and participate in the conversation. What I'm going to do is I'm going to collect all of the recommendations from the thousands of you and create a PDF resource, a listener's reader recommended list, and share it with you on 6 Shot Saturday, because I have no doubt there are some amazing books that we all need to read that we hadn't heard of yet. So I think that might be a little bit of fun. So make sure you jot down those books as you think of them. But before we get into the geeking out on reading, let's geek out on this disclaimer we got to take care of. That's right, it's time for the all-important disclaimer, and that is basically don't take advice from Roger Whitney. That's me on this show. And the reason you don't want to take advice from me is not because I'm an idiot. It's just because I don't know you. I don't know enough about you to give you advice, and that would be silly for me to try. I only give advice to clients, and that I work as a fiduciary for. So in this show, think of it as helpful hints and education, and before you make a decision, talk to your financial advisor, your legal advisor, your tax advisor, and in this case, maybe your librarian, because that's just common sense. Now, let's define a reading term so we can start to walk this journey to finding great books.
Huh? What does that mean?
So in the What Does That Mean segment today, I want to just make sure we define books nowadays, because it's not the normal book, right? We have the ebooks, which are electronic books that we read on our Kindle or our Nook or our iPad. We have audiobooks, which are read to us. Books are not just these dusty old things anymore. They're interactive. You can see videos within books. It's crazy what they're doing, and it's just going to get crazier. Now, that's a good and a bad thing, right? The good thing is, because we have ebooks and audiobooks, publishers, people that have something to say, can publish without having to be chosen by a publisher. They can actually publish via Amazon Press totally on their own. You could write 200 words of gobbledygook and publish it on Amazon Press, and somebody could buy it via Amazon and put it on their Kindle, even if it didn't make any sense. So we have more access to more authors than ever before, which is an amazing thing. There have been some pretty big books that have come from fairly self-published or independently published books. I think The Martian was one of those. I could be wrong, but I think it was, and it became a movie. Now, the downside to that is twofold. One is you got a bunch of stuff you have to cull through to find good things, right? Because just because you can write a book doesn't necessarily mean you should, right? Just like I should never sing and create an album. That's one downside. There's a lot of stuff we got to cull through. So that's where you and I are going to create this great resource together. And number two, and this is my problem because I travel a lot. So I listen to a lot of audiobooks. I got an audible.com subscription and I love it. And then I'll get a book and I'm like, wow, that's an amazing book, but I'm driving. I can't write it down. I can't bookmark it. So I'll buy the digital form and then I'll highlight it and do everything else. But then there's a problem. As convenient as the digital form is, it's hard to get your highlights and your notes out of it. I know they're getting better at that, but it's still hard. Then if I really like it, especially if it's related to the show, I'll go buy the hardcover book or the softcover book, and that's the one I'm going to tear up and write all over and earmark and just make a mess of. So I end up owning 3 versions, paying 3 different times for the same book. You know, that's the price of loving to read, but that's one of the downsides as well. But so that is what we're talking about nowadays with books. It can come in so many formats. Now, let's figure out how often are people actually reading, because we hear that nobody reads anymore. So let's see if that's true. In the news recently was the results of a Pew research on reading habits of Americans, and they did find that Americans are reading slightly less than they did 4 or 5 years ago. So according to Pew Research, back in 2011, 79% of Americans had read at least one book in any format, audio, digital, whatever, in 12 months. So back in 2011, 79% of Americans had read at least one book in some kind of form. And then the most recent study that came out said in 2015, 72% of Americans had read at least one book in some format. So we definitely have a decrease in overall readership. Now, we can say, wow, that means 28% of people don't read books. That is sad. I don't know what the percentage has been long term, but it also means 72% of people do read books. And I'm guessing they read a lot more. Now, what I thought was interesting from this Pew study is that when we look at age groups, where the distribution of reading came from, because, you know, I think the stereotype is, these kids are on their iPhones texting all the time. They never read books. They're never going to learn. Well, in fact, according to Pew Research, the younger you are, the more likely you are to read. So the 18 to 29 age segment had read a book in some format. 80% of them had read at least one book in some format. And then if you go from 30 to 49, it went down to 71% had read a book in some format. And then the 50 to 64 segment, the majority of people that probably listen to this show, only 68% of people had read some book in some format. And then over age 65, it goes up slightly. So actually, the younger you are, the more likely it is that you've read some type of book, which goes against a lot of the common knowledge. So I think reading is healthier than ever. We're just doing it differently. Now, what kind of book should we read if we want to be a better investor and make a better life? Well, let me share mine here coming up. So before I share the 2 lists of books for you, I want to make something clear. First off, these are not my top 5 in each category. Okay. Now this isn't a popularity list. There are probably much better books on these subjects. The way I selected the 5 books in each category is the impact that they had on me when I read them. So it's sort of like the master will appear when the student is ready. Each of these books entered my life at a certain time where I was open to the message, and it allowed them to have a big impact. So this does not mean that they're the greatest books out there. They were just books that had an impact on me, and I think could have an impact on you. Now, remember, I want you to keep track of the ones that you see that had an impact on you in the investing and in the life category, and share those with me so we can compile that together. And secondly, they're not necessarily all new books or old books. New books are great because Ideas are always evolving. There are always cool ways to explain concepts, but they cannot be proven, right? And we don't want to get into pop psychology here. But on the flip side, just because something is a classic doesn't mean it's great, either from a message standpoint or told in a way that would resonate with you and I. And Mark Twain, I think, used to say that, classic is a book that is praised by everybody, but nobody reads. So I didn't pay attention to any of that. I just found books that had an impact on me. So that's how we're going to approach this. So let's start off on the investing category. The first book I want to talk about is a book called Winning the Loser's Game: Timeless Strategies for Successful Investing. Now, this is actually on its 7th edition. So this is a classic. I think this was published in the 70s, and it's been updated by Charles Ellis numerous times. I read this probably 15, 20 years ago. So he talks about the markets and how they've evolved, and he gets into the efficient market hypothesis, which is how there are so many amazingly smart players, people, managers, investment managers, working to find edges in the market to make money that they cancel each other out at the end of the day. They all are so smart and so skilled and have such great resources at their disposal that at the end of the day, they end up canceling each other out. So it becomes a loser's game as markets become more efficient because all the information is priced in so quickly. So he is a proponent of passive investing, and he makes an intellectually very sound argument for avoiding some of the loser tricks of trying to beat markets. One of the analogies that he uses is tennis. So we just had the US Open that finished here not too long ago. And when you have a group of players that are at the peak of their game and are the best of the best, and they're all competing against each other, Mr. Ellis argues in his book that, well, they all cancel each other out. It's not so much about hitting the best shot, although you see amazing shots if you watch tennis. I'm not a tennis player, but I'm impressed. It becomes a game of making the least unforced errors because everybody's so good. So it's the players that make the least unforced errors that tend to succeed. And that's very impossible to do, but passive investing is one way to miss those errors. Now, I read this back when I was primarily trading technology stocks in the 90s. So it really opened my mind to a different way of approaching markets, one that was much more intellectually robust and helped me evolve in my investment process. So the first one is Winning the Loser's Game by Charles Ellis. Now, the second book is The Rational Optimist: How Prosperity Evolves by Matt Ridley. Now, this was published in 2011, and I read that right around the time that it came out. And it was a very timely book for me, and it may be for you even now. So you remember 2011, we were fresh out of 2008, that big debacle. Our faith in our economy, in our government, in the prosperity of the world with peak oil and global warming and overpopulation and wars and everything else. Since 2008, all of those negative things that have worried us and dominated the news can really poison our optimism and how we feel about the future. And so Matt Ridley makes a very rational case for why we should be positive about the future. Now, I needed to hear that at this time, and I'm guessing that you may need to hear that right now because it's very difficult in the midst of this election season to be real positive about things when we watch the news cycle. But he walks through very methodically why we should be optimistic, how adept our society, our economies, and our world is at adapting and evolving. Now, he doesn't give a Pollyannish view to the world, but he at least gives some balance to the 24/7 negativity news. And I think it's worth reading to give you some balance to some of this perspective that we have. Now, the third book, unlike the first two, is a really simple read. It's called The Behavior Gap: Simple Ways to Stop Doing Dumb Things with Your Money, written by Carl Richards, who is a financial planner and a researcher and a speaker. In a very light read, he talks about some of the behavioral things that we do that sabotage our own self-interest, especially when we're dealing with money. And he's found his little niche in drawing with a Sharpie on paper napkins, very, very simple illustrations that express a point and get a message across. So it's a really simple read. It's a very small book, but it was one of my first exposures to behavioral finance and how important that is in our success as investors and as stewards of our wealth. So it's called The Behavior Gap by Carl Lewis. Now, the fourth book is really the oldest book on the list. It was originally published in 1954. I can remember owning a copy of this in high school. So I was on the debate team. I was in debate all through high school, competed all through the state, and actually coached it for a little bit. And the book is called How to Lie with Statistics by Darrell Huff and Irving Guise. So very small book, done in a very entertaining way. I think over 500 million copies sold, a zillion copies sold. It's amazing. But I had this book in debate because in debate, you're arguing and you have a pro and a con, and you would bring up evidence. And if you understood how statistics can be manipulated in studies or in papers, you can call into question the evidence that's being presented to you. And this book helped me understand some of the nuances of how people use statistics to tell stories that they want to tell based on what statistics they use, how they use them, the start and end date, and everything else. So in part of my role as a financial planner, I do a lot of due diligence on investment strategies, on private investments and business deals and things like that. So it really has helped informed me in that process of due diligence to know when, hey, these numbers, yeah, they all look great on paper. Every investment sheet you see always looks amazing on paper until you start to dig into it and understand the numbers behind the numbers and how they might be manipulated in a little bit of a way to tell a story. So it's a great little read to help you understand that just because you hear a number or statistic doesn't necessarily mean it's true or that it tells you the whole story. Now, the last book that I want to talk about in the investing category is Stocks for the Long Run, the Definitive Guide to Financial Market Returns and Long-Term Investment Strategies by Dr. Jeremy Siegel. Now, this is not light reading. You might, watch him on YouTube. He's an entertaining speaker. He's a Wharton professor. He developed return data on equities and on bonds and on gold and on real estate going back hundreds of years to make the case why equities, stocks, deserve to be a significant component of most portfolios. I got the privilege to spend some time with Dr. Siegel here about 3 months ago and hear him speak and talk to him a little bit. And he is an amazing man. And it's amazing the intellectual depth in research that has gone into his work as well as Dr. Ellis's and others' work that really informs us and gets beyond the day-to-day waves of popularity of different strategies to what really the data shows us. So it's not an easy read at all, but it's one of those books that when you want to get past all the fluff and see what the data tells us, it really helps tell that story. So that's Stocks for the Long Run by Dr. Jeremy Siegel. Now let's go to the softer side of things and talk about 5 books that have really helped me create a better life, but also that have helped me become a better advisor in helping clients create a better life as well. And the first book that I want to talk about is actually a business book called Great by Choice. So Great by Choice was written by Jim Collins and Morton Hansen, and they wrote Great by Choice, Good to Great, Built to Last, books that were examining businesses. They found great businesses and said, well, how did they become great businesses and sustain that? And they pulled some lessons from all of their research. So they are professors, they are researchers. So this is very robust reading, but it's done in a very entertaining way. So you might be asking, well, Roger, what does that have to do with creating a great life or creating a great retirement? Well, what I love about Great by Choice is it pulls out from their very in-depth research, lessons, and little phrases that can really apply to you and I when we're making decisions about our life. So for example, one of their little phrases is fire bullets, then cannonballs. So what they talked about with great companies, what they would do is, before they got into a new market or they made a big decision, they wouldn't just fire some big grand gesture and invest a ton of money to see if something worked and have it fail. That's like firing a cannonball. First, what they would do is they would fire little bullets, test their ideas, and calibrate their gun, in this metaphor. And then once they had enough data to know what the markets look like, then they would fire their cannonball and make a big bet on that industry or on that project. So if you think about how that applies to your life or my life, how many times do we want to just tell them to take that job and shove it, quit and start a business, which is a classic example. Not necessarily a bad idea, but do you just want to do the grand gesture of quitting the job, tell them to take the job and shove it, and just start a business and figure it out as you go along? That's firing a cannonball before you've figured out and calibrated what your plan is. And trust me, I've learned this lesson. I've fired uncalibrated cannonballs before and paid the price for it and had to dig myself out of it. So these kind of lessons really go to, okay, if we're going to make this transition towards retirement, well, let's fire bullets and let's figure out the plan. Let's calibrate what we're doing here. And once we have enough data and information on what will work, then we can fire the cannonball, leave the work, and live a more independent life. Let's just not do it in some big grand gesture. So that's an example of how these books can apply. So if you read Great by Choice or Good to Great, another great book, think of it from the terms of how you make decisions, even though they're talking about big businesses. The second book in the life category that I want to talk about is a book called 20,000 Days and Counting. Now, you could read this in a night. 20,000 Days and Counting by Robert D. Smith is a very short book, but very powerful. It was given to me by a good friend, Jamie, earlier this year, actually. And I've read it numerous times. And he basically says, measure your life in days. So rather than grand planning, look at your life and bring it back down to living a great day today and being present in the moment. Because sometimes we can get so caught up in other things that we forget to do just the next thing right. Now, disclaimer, this book and a few others are Christian-based. So they have that tint to it. I'm a Christian. It speaks to me. I know friends that are not Christians. It speaks to them, but just be aware of it. But it's a beautiful written book, and it's very short, and it will help you focusing on what's really important, which is the day that you have right now and what you're doing to make the most of it. The third book I want to talk about is a book called Necessary Endings by Henry Cloud. This is a book that is really about making those tough decisions. It's how to make a decision when something obviously isn't working out. And that could be certain relationships. It could be businesses. It could be activities. It could be holding on to past failures and obligations and duties and responsibilities that you've collected over time, so you can move on to creating a better life. So it's that mindset to proactively take things that are broken and end them in a respectful way so you are free mentally and physically to move forward in creating a great life. This is something I'm going to tell you we all struggle with and we need to learn how to do. And Necessary Endings really paints a beautiful picture of what this is and how difficult it is to do it. But on the back end, he gives strategies for how to execute those necessary endings so you can free yourself intellectually, physically, and emotionally to move forward to creating a great life. So it's a beautiful book in how to deal with that, because moving forward, we can only do that if we clean up things that need to be ended for some reason. Now, the fourth book I want to talk about is one of those books that I listened to the audio, bought the digital, and then bought the hardcover, and then actually went on and listened to lectures online because I was so into it. It's called Essentialism by Greg McKeown. So it's essentialism. The disciplined pursuit of less. So if you're feeling overwhelmed at work and at home and in your personal life, this book is going to hit you hard. It hit me hard because it's really like, dude, what are you doing? You have all of these things that you obligate yourself to and that you allow to intrude into your life that you miss the important things. So he walks through what the issues are, and we all know what those issues are with cell phones and activities and obligations. And he's basically like, we collect all these things over time. It's like a closet collecting clothes. There are times we just got to clean out the closet and do a lot less. And his argument is we should be doing a lot less in our life. We should be a lot less connected. And here's how to do it. So I listened to the audio and I was like, amen, brother, you're preaching to me as I'm driving around. And then I read the digital book, and then I got the hardcover to actually work to apply some of this in my life. And I'm going to tell you, it ain't easy. So I ended up applying maybe 5 or 10% of it in my life in terms of focusing on doing less so I can do more impactful things. And it's a work in progress. I reread this book a number of times, but I think it will help you think differently about how your life is organized. Now, the last book I want to talk about in this life section is a very new book published this year by Michael Hyatt called Living Forward. Now, I've had the privilege of meeting Michael Hyatt and spending some time with him. He is a former CEO of a publishing company, and he is a prolific blogger and podcaster and a teacher at heart. And he teaches in this book how to stop drifting in your life and to get what you want. So this is really a life planning book using that SMART goal methodology that we've talked about before. And he lays out step by step how to plan through the rest of your life and create actionable goals. So this is really one of those books you could take, go off with on your own or with your spouse for a retreat and come out with a life plan. But I love it because, one, I love his spirit, but two, I love the intentionality and the action-oriented steps that he takes. So that's one that you could literally take and, if you executed it, create a life plan that was meaningful to you. Now, I know, as I went through these 10 books fairly quickly, you're saying, dude, I can't believe you didn't include this one or that one. This one changed my life. Why did it change your life? I love that. So let's deal with that in the Smart Sprint segment.
On your marks, get set.
All right, our Smart Sprint for the next 7 days. This is where we set a goal, right? To accomplish something in the next 7 days. You know what it's going to be. I'm going to ask you, I'm going to challenge you in the next 7 days. Email me an investing book that was very impactful in your journey to being a good steward of your money. And email me a book that was impactful to you in creating a better life. So that's my challenge to you. Either send me an email at roger@wwkllc.com or reply to this week's 6 Shot Saturday. I'm going to compile all of those, and I will share with you the listener reading recommendation list. I'll compile all these and share them to you via 6 Shot Saturday email, and there may be a book in there that could literally improve your investing or change your life. Maybe it'll do the same for me. That would be great. Hey, I want to thank you so much for joining me on this week's show, The Retirement Answer Man. This is one of my favorite times of the week, and I appreciate the fact that you choose to spend this time with me. It means a lot. If you have any retirement questions, shoot me an email. Go to rogerwhitney.com. Until next week, this is Roger Whitney, The Retirement Answer Man.
We appreciate you joining us today for this episode of Retirement Answer Man. Be sure to visit rogerwhitney.com/answers to access the Retirement Answer Library with over 30 checklists to help you make the most of the only life you have. Remember, you have more power than you realize to create an amazing life starting today with Retirement Answer Man. The opinions voiced in this material are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. All performance referenced is historical and no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested into directly. Have a wonderful day.